if you were going to, release a massive high-stakes thriller,
Right.
like a story that is just packed with violent mutinies and ground-swallowing earthquakes.
The giant slaying, all of it.
Exactly. All of that.
Hmm.
And the terrifying reality of living right next door to this highly volatile, lethal, divine presence. Well, you need a title that sells it.
You really do.
You don't take a story that feels like a gritty wilderness survival epic and call it, a list of extinct reptiles.
No, you definitely don't.
You call it Jurassic Park. You give it a hook.
Which really highlights the ultimate historical branding problem here.
Equally.
Because the text we are diving into today, the fourth book of the Hebrew Bible, it is universally known by what has to be the driest title ever.
The absolute driest.
Just the most bureaucratic, joyless title imaginable. Numbers.
It sounds like an accounting manual. I mean, it literally sounds like reading a spreadsheet out loud to someone.
Yeah, it really does.
But the moment you actually crack it open, the spreadsheet catches fire.
It really does. It explodes.
The sheer volume of, psychological drama and geopolitical tension in this text is just staggering. And our mission for today's deep dive is to rescue this often skipped document from the dusty shelves of history.
That's a great way to put it.
We are looking for the aha moments hidden under that terrible title. And to do that, we are grounding our conversation in a really phenomenal comprehensive source document for you all.
Yes, it's titled Survey of Numbers by Chris R. Velasquez.
And it covers everything. I mean, everything from ancient Near Eastern archaeology to the deeply layered literary structure of the text.
It is an incredibly thorough survey.
Okay.
And just to give you a 30,000-foot view before we get into the weeds today.
Yeah, do.
So the Book of Numbers is the fourth part of the Pentateuch, or the Torah. Canonically, it sits right there between Leviticus and Deuteronomy.
I always think of it as the connective tissue, like the narrative bridge.
Yeah, that is a really helpful way to frame it. Because if the Book of Exodus is all about getting Israel out of Egypt, and then Leviticus answers the very specific question of, well, how can a perfect holy God actually live among a flawed, unholy people?
Which is a big question.
A huge question. Then Numbers asks the inevitable follow-up.
Which is what?
How does that unholy people physically travel with a holy God through a completely hostile wasteland toward their inheritance?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It is fundamentally a story of movement. It tracks an entire nation migrating from Mount Sinai right through the chaotic, unforgiving wilderness, all the way to the plains of Moab.
Just right on the edge of the promised land.
Exactly. Right on the doorstep.
Which brings us right back to the title. Because to actually understand what this book is trying to do to its reader, what it's trying to do to you, we really have to fix that branding problem.
We do. We have to address it.
Because I know our English title, Numbers, it comes to us through a, long game of historical telephone, right?
Yeah, basically. From the Greek Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate translations.
Right, because those translators were just hyper-focused on the military censuses in chapters 1, 4, and 26.
They really were.
But the original Hebrew title is completely different.
It is. The Hebrew title is Bimidbar.
Bimidbar, which translates to in the wilderness.
In the wilderness. And honestly, that title shift is vital. The Velasquez survey makes a really strong case for the theological weight of that specific word.
How so?
Well, in the context of the ancient Near East, the wilderness is not a place for a fun camping trip.
Right, no hiking trails.
No, it is a desolate, dangerous, chaotic void. It is an arena.
An arena, I like that.
The wilderness serves as this massive crucible for divine training and extreme testing.
Like a pressure cooker.
Exactly. It is the specific geographic and spiritual location where a totally disorganized group of former slaves is broken down, tested, and forged into a covenant community.
It sets the expectation for the reader perfectly. In the wilderness tells you to expect scarcity, fear, survival.
It changes the whole genre.
It really does. But before we drop, a million people into that desert, we have to establish who actually built this literary crucible.
Right, the authorship question.
Yeah, the source document goes into the debate on the authorship and the composition of the text. And I think it's important to lay out how scholars view this for you listening.
Yeah, not to pick a side, but just to understand the architecture of the text.
Exactly. We're not telling you what to believe here, just mapping out the scholarship. So where do scholars land?
Well, the scholarship generally falls into two camps. On one side, you have the conservative evangelical view.
Okay.
And they argue that Moses is the primary foundational author, They point to internal claims right there within the text itself.
Like what kind of claims?
For example, in Numbers chapter 33, verse 2, the text explicitly states that Moses physically wrote down the starting points of their journeys.
Oh, like he kept a literal travel log.
Exactly, at the command of the Lord. And this view also leans heavily on the constant, repetitive formula you find everywhere in the book.
The Lord spoke to Moses.
Yes. So they see a Mosaic core originating way back in the late Bronze Age, like around the 15th or 13th century BCE.
Though they usually acknowledge some later editing, right?
Right, usually acknowledging that later editors probably polished the final version that we have today.
Okay, so that's the conservative side. And the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you read it, the book often talks about Moses in the third person.
It does, a lot.
And it sometimes adds these little editorial notes about him, like calling him the most humble man on the face of the earth.
Yeah, chapter 12.
Which is just a really weird thing to write about yourself if you're actually the most humble man on earth, you know?
It's a bit of a contradiction, yeah. And that observation is exactly what drives the critical scholarship view.
Okay, so how do they read it?
Critical scholars look at those third-person inserts, and they also look at shifts in vocabulary and theological themes across the book.
Like different styles of writing.
Exactly. And they conclude that Numbers is a highly composite work. They argue it reached its final form much later, put together by what are often called post-exilic editors.
Okay, let's pause on that term for a second. Post-exilic editors. That just means scholars writing after the Babylonian exile, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So we should picture Jewish scribes in the, 6th or 5th century BCE?
Well, yeah.
Scribes who have just survived their entire nation being destroyed and deported to Babylon, and now they're trying to compile their ancient histories and laws to figure out who they even are.
That is the exact historical setting for that view. But the crucial point our source makes is that even these critical scholars agree that those later editors weren't just, inventing stories out of thin air.
They weren't writing historical fiction.
No, not at all. They were preserving and weaving together much older, ancient narrative and legal traditions.
So regardless of how it was physically assembled, the final product we hold today is very deliberate.
Highly deliberate.
But it is also a bizarrely hybrid literary work. I mean, you will be reading an intense, fast-paced story about a mutiny.
Right.
And then suddenly, the very next chapter is just an excruciatingly detailed list of how to sacrifice a red heifer.
Yes, or the exact dimensions of a silver trumpet.
Exactly. As a modern reader, it feels like someone dropped a tax code right into the middle of a suspense novel.
It does feel very jarring to us, but the source survey points out something really fascinating about that.
What's that?
This alternating structure, this constant whiplash between the narrative forward movement and the static legal interruption, it's actually the core theology of the book acting out in the formatting.
Oh, wait. The structure mirrors the struggle.
Yes. Think about it. The people keep trying to move forward into the promise, right?
Yeah.
But their constant rebellion and the absolute necessity of maintaining ritual purity, it just keeps interrupting the journey.
Wow.
So the law stops the narrative just as their impurity physically stops their progress in the desert.
That is such a brilliant way to read it. It makes those boring chapters feel so intentional.
It really does.
Okay, so let's look at the starting line. The first 10 chapters. We have this massive population sitting at the base of Mount Sinai.
They've been there for about a year.
Right. And they are about to enter the wasteland. But you can't just yell, go, and have hundreds of thousands of people walk into the desert.
No, that would be absolute chaos.
It's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
And the solution they come up with in these early chapters is what the source calls the architecture of holiness.
And the level of precision in this architecture is just staggering.
Give us a picture of it.
Well, the camp is organized into this massive, meticulously designed square. The 12 tribes are arranged on the 4 points of the compass.
East, west, north, south.
Exactly. Organized by specific lineage and military capability. But the most important feature is what is sitting dead center, right in the middle of this sprawling tent city.
The tabernacle.
The tabernacle.
The physical tent where God's presence dwells, which is marked by a literal pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night.
A highly visible presence.
And surrounding that tent, acting as a kind of human buffer zone, is the priestly tribe of the Levites.
Right. And to understand the mechanism of this camp layout, the source introduces two really vital Hebrew concepts.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first is kadosh, which means holy, and the second is kahal, which means the covenant assembly.
Kadosh and Kahal.
Yes. And this isn't just about, finding your tent after dark, the architecture reflects a society that is simultaneously bound by blood kinship, mobilized for ancient warfare, and fundamentally centered entirely on worship.
The way I process this layout to make it make sense today is by imagining a massive, newly constructed city.
Okay, like that.
But instead of a normal power grid, the power source for this city is a massive, highly active, exposed nuclear reactor.
Oh, that's an intense image.
But it works,
Yeah.
right? It's sitting right in the town square. It provides incredible power. It provides heat and light in the dark. It literally gives life to the whole city.
Right.
But the radiation, the raw power of it, is lethal if you aren't prepared.
Exactly.
If you don't follow the exact safety protocols, if you just wander up to the core without a hazmat suit, it will literally destroy you.
The concept of a nuclear reactor captures attention perfectly because in the ancient Near East, holiness kadosh is not just a state of, like, moral goodness.
It's not just about being a nice person.
No, not at all. It is spatial, it is social, and it is a literal force. God's presence is the ultimate gift. I mean, it's what separates Israel from all the surrounding nations.
What?
But divine perfection is inherently dangerous to anything impure, corrupt, or chaotic.
So all these endless purity laws we read about, the hand washing, the dietary restrictions, the camp rules, this isn't just ancient bureaucracy.
No.
It's a survival mechanism. It's radiation protocol.
It is absolute survival. Nearness to that power requires mediation. You need the hazmat suits.
The Levites.
Exactly. That is why the Levites are stationed immediately around the tabernacle. They are set apart to absorb the shock, to mediate the relationship between the holy God and the unholy assembly.
They dismantle the tent. They carry the holy objects. They manage the sacrifices.
Right. The first 10 chapters are entirely dedicated to establishing this ordered, protective holiness so the people don't instantly disintegrate when the cloud starts moving.
And we even see that this holiness isn't completely locked behind genetics, right?
Right.
Like in chapter 6, it introduces the Nazirite vow.
Yes, that's a crucial detail.
So even if you aren't born a Levite, a layperson can voluntarily take a vow, the Hebrew word nazir, meaning consecrated one, to dedicate themselves.
They can step into a state of temporary, intense holiness.
But even that has strict boundaries. You can't cut your hair, you can't drink wine, you can't go near a dead body. The entire system is just built on creating boundaries.
Boundaries that ensure life. So on paper, as they prepare to finally leave Sinai, this highly ordered camp looks flawless.
Perfect on the spreadsheet.
Exactly. The censuses are complete, the tribes know their marching order, the priests are purified, the silver trumpets are forged and ready.
It's the perfect theoretical model.
Yeah.
But as soon as those silver trumpets blow in chapter 10 and they actually step into the wilderness,
Everything changes.
that perfect theoretical model just violently collides with the reality of human panic. The moment they pack up the tents, the theory of holiness fractures.
It really does. The departure from Sinai starts as this triumphant march, but almost immediately the narrative drops into a relentless cycle of rebellion.
It's so fast.
It is. Chapters 11 through 25 document the total unraveling of the first generation.
I mean, the honeymoon phase lasts, what, about 3 days?
Barely.
The people start complaining about the hardship, and then they start complaining about the food.
The manna.
Yes. They're literally being fed miraculous bread from the sky every single morning, and they start whining that they miss the fish and the leeks and the garlic they had back in Egypt.
It's wild to read.
They are romanticizing their own slavery because they are tired of the desert diet.
It reveals a deep, deep pattern of ingratitude. But the absolute turning point, the hinge upon which the entire tragedy of the book swings, happens in chapters 13 and 14.
Ah, the reconnaissance mission.
Yes.
The 12 spies.
Yes. So they finally reach the southern border of the Promised Land. And Moses sends 12 tribal leaders to scout the land of Canaan for 40 days.
To see what they're up against.
Right. And they come back and they actually confirm the promise. They say the land is magnificent. It flows with milk and honey.
They even bring back that massive cluster of grapes, right? The one so large it takes 2 men to carry it on a pole.
Exactly, the physical proof of the blessing. But 10 of those 12 spies also bring back a report that seems perfectly designed to trigger mass hysteria.
They say the cities are these massive fortresses, the people are powerful, and they specifically mention seeing the Nephilim.
The literal giants in the land.
Yeah, they say, we seems like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. And the result is a nationwide panic attack.
Total collapse morale.
Only Joshua and Caleb try to hold the line. They're saying, no, we can take the land, God is with us. But the 10 spies whip the camp into such a frenzy that the people weep all night.
They talk about stoning Moses.
They actually attempt to elect a new captain to lead them back to Egypt, to go back to slavery.
And the source analysis refers to this specific moment as the ultimate anti-faith narrative in Scripture.
Anti-faith.
Yes, because the issue at stake here is not military strategy. It's not about geography or tactics. It is the core concept of unbelief.
Right.
And to really grasp why this is so deeply offensive, we have to look at the cultural context. The ancient Near East operated on a strict honor-shame dynamic.
Okay, let me just jump in here with a bit of skepticism.
Go for it.
Because I think a modern listener hears this and feels some real sympathy for the Israelites. I know I do.
Sure.
I mean, these people were brickmakers. They're a traumatized population of former slaves who have spent a year camping in a literal wasteland.
That's true.
Now they're being told to go fight heavily armed giants in fortified cities. Isn't their fear entirely rational? I mean, if I look over a hill and see a giant with a spear, running away is just good evolutionary survival instinct.
It is logical.
So why is this reasonable fear treated as a massive treasonous capital offense in the text?
It's a great question, and I think the modern mind naturally sides with the spies because, we view caution as wisdom.
Right.
But within the theology of numbers, fear-driven decision-making in this specific context is not a psychological vulnerability. It is selective amnesia.
Selective amnesia. Okay. Unpack that.
It ignores the established track record of God's providence. Think about the data set they have to work with here.
Right. What have they already seen?
Over the last 2 years, this exact group of people watched the plagues utterly dismantle Egypt.
The greatest superpower on earth at the time.
Exactly. They walked through the Red Sea on dry ground while an Egyptian chariot army drowned behind them. They drink water from solid rock, and they eat supernatural food every single day.
That's a pretty strong resume.
It is. And the God who engineered all of that is visibly present in a pillar of fire, actively saying to them, I have given you this land. So for them to look at a tall wall and a tall man and say, we're going to die, we should go back to slavery, is essentially calling God a liar.
It's a total breach of contract.
It is a profound public dishonoring of the patron who redeemed them. In an honor-shame culture, publicly accusing your patron of bringing you out to the desert just to murder your children is the ultimate treachery.
Wow. Put that way, the context makes all the difference. And the consequence of that treachery is devastating.
Truly devastating.
Because they refuse to enter, God basically gives them exactly what they ask for, right? He gives them the wilderness.
He sentences that entire adult generation to wander in the desert for 40 years.
Until every single one of them dies off.
Yes. Only their children, the very children they claimed would be taken as plunder along with Joshua and Caleb, will actually survive to inherit the land.
It is a staggering consequence. But what's equally staggering to me is that this panic and unbelief doesn't just stay with the average citizen in the outer tents.
No, it spreads.
The crisis of faith moves all the way up the chain of command. It infects the absolute highest tiers of leadership.
The executive branch completely fractures.
Let's look at chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron, Moses' own sister and brother. They basically stage a soft coup.
They do. And remember, Miriam is a recognized prophetess, and Aaron is the high priest. You don't get a higher rank than that without being Moses.
But they get jealous.
Very jealous.
They use Moses' marriage to a Cushite woman as this kind of pretext, but their real issue is power. They ask, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us?
It is a direct challenge to the unique mediatorial role that Moses holds. And the text notes that Moses, being incredibly humble, doesn't even argue back with them.
He just lets it happen?
He does. So God himself has to descend in the pillar of cloud, call the three of them out to the tent, and publicly vindicate Moses.
And Miriam is temporarily struck with a terrifying skin disease.
Which is significant because that makes her ritually impure. She becomes an exile from the very camp she was trying to control.
It's poetic justice in a terrifying way. But honestly, that's just a family dispute compared to what happens in chapter 16.
Ah, yes. The revolt of Korah.
Korah is a Levite.
Yeah.
He is already part of the privileged, set-apart group handling the tabernacle. He already has the hazmat suit.
He does. But proximity to power often breeds the desire for absolute power.
Ain't that the truth?
Korah is not satisfied with just transporting the holy objects. He wants the priesthood itself, so he organizes a massive institutional revolt.
He rallies, what, 250 prominent tribal leaders?
Yes, 250 chiefs of the congregation. And his argument sounds incredibly appealing, especially to a modern democratic ear.
What does he say?
He tells Moses and Aaron, the whole congregation is holy, every one of them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?
It sounds like a populist uprising. Power to the people. We don't need you elite mediators.
It really does. But again, you have to remember the architecture of the camp. It was designed by God, not Moses.
Right.
So Korah's rebellion isn't against Moses' ego. It's a direct assault on the divine mechanism of survival.
It's basically saying, we don't need the hazmat suits, let's all just walk right up to the nuclear core.
Exactly. And the result is a catastrophic display of divine judgment.
The earth literally opens up.
It opens up and swallows Korah and his immediate followers alive, and then fire comes out and consumes the 250 men offering unauthorized incense.
The reactor flares up and incinerates the breach in protocol.
That's exactly what happens. The source points out that leadership in the Book of Numbers is not about administration. It is not about keeping the people happy or, making the trains run on time.
What is it about?
It is a terrifying stewardship of holy things.
A terrifying stewardship. Which brings us to, I think, the most tragic proof of that stewardship in the whole book, chapter 20, the incident at Meribah.
Yes, a very sad chapter.
The people are back to their old tricks, complaining bitterly because there is no water. And God gives Moses a very simple instruction. He says, take your staff, gather the assembly, and speak to a specific rock, and it will pour out water.
Just speak to it.
Just speak to it. But Moses, who has carried the weight of this stubborn, rebellious nation for decades, he finally snaps.
He hits his breaking point.
He gathers the people, but instead of speaking to the rock, he screams at the crowd. He says, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? And then he violently strikes the rock twice with his staff.
And water does flow out. God's provision for the people isn't stopped by Moses' personal failure.
But God's judgment falls on Moses immediately.
It does. Because Moses failed to trust God and honor him as holy in the sight of the Israelites, Moses is told he will not be the one to lead the people into the promised land.
Now, I have to be honest, for a long time, I struggled to understand why this was the breaking point.
It feels harsh, right?
It feels like God overreacting to a guy just losing his temper on a really stressful Tuesday.
Yeah.
But here is a mechanism that makes sense of it for me.
Let's hear it.
Imagine Moses, not as a CEO, but as a high-level, trusted ambassador for a powerful king.
Okay.
The ambassador is sent to a starving province to distribute aid. But when he gets there, the people are rude, they're demanding, they're ungrateful.
Right.
The ambassador loses his temper, starts yelling, throws the food at them, and says, do we really have to feed you ungrateful people?
He centers himself in the action.
Yes. He says, must we bring you water? He takes credit for the miracle. But even worse, as an ambassador, his entire job is to accurately reflect the character of the king.
Exactly.
The king wanted to show grace and provide water. Moses made it look like the king was furious, petty, and resentful.
He completely misrepresented the king.
He broke the diplomatic protocol of the cosmos. He misrepresented the nature of God to the people. And for an ultimate mediator, that is a fatal breach of trust. He has to be recalled.
That is an excellent framework. Moses eclipsed the holiness of God with his own frustration. It underscores that leadership requires exact obedience, not just a resume of past faithfulness.
And right after this tragedy, we get a story that intertwines judgment and grace in one of the most paradoxical images in the ancient world. Chapter 21.
The bronze serpent.
The bronze serpent. The people are complaining again, specifically about the manna. They call it miserable food.
Always back to the food.
Always. And this time, God's protective grace lifts, and venomous snakes enter the camp. People are being bitten and dying. They immediately repent and beg Moses to intercede.
But the mechanism God chooses for their salvation is deeply unusual.
That's an understatement.
God doesn't just banish the snakes. He tells Moses to forge a bronze serpent, mount it on a pole, and raise it up. And anyone who is bitten simply has to look at the bronze serpent and they will survive.
It feels incredibly counterintuitive. Why use the very symbol of their judgment and death, a snake, as the instrument for their healing?
It's a paradox.
It's like telling someone who is just badly burned to stare at a picture of a fire to heal their skin.
It forces the people to confront the reality of their sin. They have to look directly at the symbol of their consequence to receive the cure.
They can't look away.
Exactly. They cannot save themselves. They have to exercise active faith in God's specific physical provision.
It requires them to surrender their own logic and just trust the mediator's instruction.
Yes. And the Velasas survey highlights how this specific event has a massive redemptive historical footprint.
Redemptive historical footprint. For the listeners, what exactly does that mean?
When scholars use that term, they are talking about how an event in the Old Testament sets a theological pattern that echoes forward into the New Testament.
A Christological pattern.
Right. Christological meaning it maps onto the life and work of Jesus. For example, in the Gospel of John, chapter 3.
The famous conversation with Nicodemus.
Yes, Jesus is talking to a religious scholar, and he explicitly anchors his own mission to this bizarre desert event.
What does he say?
Jesus says, "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him."
So the early Christians looked back at Numbers and said, this isn't just a weird historical footnote about a bronze statue. This is the blueprint.
It is the blueprint of salvation. The ultimate cure for the curse of death is found by looking in faith at the one who took the curse of death upon himself.
It's just incredible how deep the layers go here. But I want to pivot our focus for a minute.
Sure, where to?
Because while we have been deep in the weeds of the Israelite camp, watching the mutinies, the plagues, the snakes, the water from rocks, this massive migration isn't happening in a vacuum.
No, the rest of the world is watching.
Right. There are other nations, other kingdoms, watching 1 million people march right toward their borders, which sets off what I think is the most fascinating geopolitical side quest in the entire Bible.
Chapters 22 through 24, the Balaam narrative.
I love this section. So Israel has finally reached the plains of Moab, just east of the Jordan River. And Balak, the king of Moab, is terrified.
He is panicking.
He looks down from his fortress, sees this horde of people, and assumes his entire economy and his kingdom are about to be devoured. But he knows military force won't work against a people who just defeated the Amorites.
Well, he goes a different route.
He goes full spiritual warfare. He hires an internationally famous, non-Israelite diviner named Balaam. He pays him a fortune to come stand on a mountain and weaponize spiritual power to curse Israel.
And this is where the source document provides some absolutely thrilling archaeological context.
Let's get into the dirt.
Well, for centuries, critical readers treated the story of Balaam, this pagan seer who eventually has a conversation with his own donkey.
Right, a talking donkey.
Yeah, they treated it as a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Just a later mythical invention dropped into the text to make a theological point.
But archaeology changed that.
Modern archaeology has completely blown that assumption apart.
What did they find? Because I know the source mentioned the Merneptah stele in Egypt.
The Merneptah stele is crucial for the broad context of the whole era. It's a massive granite monument carved by the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah around 1208 BCE.
So, late Bronze Age.
Yes. It boasts about his military victories in Canaan, and it explicitly mentions defeating a group called Israel.
Wow.
It is the earliest universally accepted extra-biblical proof that a people group named Israel actually existed in the region during that transition period.
That's huge. And I think the source also touches on a recently debated 2025 epigraphic fragment.
It does.
Now, epigraphic fragment basically just means a broken piece of pottery or stone with writing scratched into it, right?
Exactly. And there is debate over this new fragment that might push the written name of Israel even earlier, though scholars are urging caution until more peer review is done.
Fair enough. Good to be cautious.
Yeah.
But the real showstopper for our specific story, the Balaam story, was found in 1967, right?
Oh, absolutely. Archaeologists were excavating a site called Deir Allah in modern-day Jordan.
Which is the exact geographic region where the biblical plains of Moab are located.
The exact spot. They found the remains of an ancient building that had been destroyed by an earthquake in the 8th century BCE.
Okay.
And written on the fallen plaster walls, with black and red ink, was a long, poetic text.
And what did the writing on the wall say?
The very first line of the plaster inscription reads, "The warnings from the book of Balaam, the son of Beor. He was a seer of the gods."
It names him.
It explicitly names him.
The exact same name, the exact same profession, in the exact same region. That is stunning.
It really is. Now, to be clear, the Deir Allah inscription is not a copy of the Book of Numbers.
Right.
It tells a different, independent story about Balaam receiving a vision of doom from a polytheistic pantheon of gods. But the fact that his name was written on a wall in Jordan hundreds of years later proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Balaam, the son of Beor, was a real, highly famous historical cultural figure in the ancient Near East.
He wasn't a fairy tale.
No, he was the celebrity spiritual hitman of his day.
If he was that famous across the ancient world, it completely changes how we read his appearance in the text. Balak isn't just hiring a random local mystic. He is hiring the absolute best money can buy.
The top tier.
But here is the dynamic that just blows my mind about this whole sequence. While Balak and Balaam are up on this mountain ridge building altars and trying to execute a supernatural curse, Israel is down in the valley, completely oblivious.
They have no idea it's happening.
They are probably in their tents, complaining about the heat, violating purity laws, just failing miserably as usual.
Most likely, yes.
So why does the author dedicate 3 whole chapters to a story where the main characters don't even know they are in danger?
It is a masterclass in theological irony. The author is forcing the reader to look at a split-screen reality.
A split screen, I like that.
On the bottom screen, inside the camp, Israel is faithless, rebellious, and constantly failing their covenant obligations. But on the top screen, outside the camp, God is actively intercepting a spiritual attack to protect them. Balaam opens his mouth to curse Israel, but God literally overrides his tongue. Every time he tries to curse them, beautiful, sweeping, poetic blessings come out instead.
He even prophesies their future military dominance.
Yes, he does.
In chapter 24, Balaam says, "A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel," which is a line that echoes throughout Jewish and Christian history as this massive messianic promise.
And it comes from the mouth of a pagan diviner who was hired to destroy them. The irony is profound.
It's beautiful.
It shows that human political power and elite spiritual manipulation cannot coerce divine blessing. God remains fiercely loyal to his covenant promises, even when his people are utterly faithless. He is protecting them from enemies they don't even know they have.
But the tragedy is that Israel doesn't actually need Balaam to destroy them.
No.
They are perfectly capable of destroying themselves.
Yeah.
Right after Balaam leaves in chapter 25, the Israelite men fall into a massive scandal.
The incident at Peor.
Yeah. They begin sleeping with the women of Moab and Midian and are drawn into worshiping the local deity, Baal of Peor. It's a disastrous blend of sexual immorality and idolatry.
It triggers a lethal plague that only stops when a priest named Phineas takes extreme violent action against a couple who blatantly flaunt their idolatry right in front of the tabernacle.
It is the final horrific failure of the older generation.
It really is.
Which means it's time for the reset.
Yeah.
The 40 years are coming to an end. The people who doubted God at the edge of Canaan have died in the wilderness.
Right.
And chapters 26 through 36 shift the focus to the new generation, preparing to actually enter the land.
It begins with the second census, the numbering of the new generation.
Right.
But the source emphasizes that this final section is not just administrative housekeeping. It is about establishing the architecture of justice.
The architecture of justice.
Yes. The wilderness broke them down. Now the law is building them up into a functional society. And the clearest example of this involves a remarkable legal challenge in chapter 27.
The daughters of Zelophehad. Oh, I am obsessed with this story.
It's a fantastic narrative.
Let's name them, because they deserve it. Mala, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah.
Great names.
Their father, Zelophehad, he died in the wilderness, and he had no sons. Now, in the deeply patriarchal legal code of the ancient Near East, land inheritance passed exclusively through the male line, right?
Almost without exception.
So, if you had no sons, your family name and your property were effectively absorbed or completely lost. These 5 women are staring down the barrel of total disenfranchisement. When Israel enters the land, they will get absolutely nothing.
And in most ancient cultures, that would be the end of the story. They would be expected to quietly accept their cultural fate.
But they don't. They act like brilliant constitutional lawyers.
They really do.
They go to the entrance of the tent of meeting, which is basically the supreme court of the camp, and they stand before Moses, the priest Eleazar, the tribal chiefs, and the entire assembly.
Very
Highly public. And they publicly state their case. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives.
Right.
They spot a massive gap in the jurisprudence, and they demand justice.
And the mechanism of Moses' response is vital here.
What does he do?
He doesn't dismiss them. He doesn't just assert his own patriarchal authority. He brings their specific case before the Lord.
And the ruling.
The divine ruling is unprecedented. God says what Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right.
They win the case.
They win. They literally amend the national inheritance laws to ensure that daughters can inherit land if there is no son.
They set a massive legal precedent that protects the vulnerable.
To fully grasp why this matters so much, we have to understand the Hebrew concept of nullah, which means inheritance or portion.
Okay, unpack Noah.
The source document makes a critical theological point here. In the book of Numbers, the Promised Land is not mere real estate.
It's not just a commodity.
Exactly. It isn't just property to be bought, sold, or speculated on. The land is a tangible covenant gift from God. It is the physical manifestation of belonging to the community.
So if these women lose their land, they aren't just losing a farm or a source of income.
No.
They're losing their identity as participants in the covenant promise itself.
Exactly. The Zelophehad daughters prove that covenant law is not a static, oppressive monolith. It is capable of responding to protect justice.
That is so inspiring.
It is. The final chapters of Numbers are filled with this kind of societal preparation. We see the establishment of cities of refuge, for example.
Right, where someone who accidentally commits manslaughter can flee to escape blood vengeance and receive a fair trial.
Yes. The text is building a society structured by justice and the rule of law before they even cross the river.
It's amazing. But we need to pump the brakes here for a minute.
Uh-oh. Why is that?
Because while stories like the Daughters of Zelophehad are incredibly empowering, anyone reading the book of Numbers cover to cover is going to slam headfirst into some of the most difficult, violent, and controversial material in the entire biblical canon.
That is very true.
We have to walk into the interpretive minefield. We can't avoid it.
And we shouldn't avoid it. The Velocity survey spends considerable time addressing the major critical hurdles of the text impartially.
Let's start with the math.
The censuses.
Yeah. The title is Numbers, and the numbers we are given in these censuses are mathematically staggering. The text says there are over 600,000 fighting men.
Right.
If you add women, children, and the elderly to that figure, you are looking at a migrating population of 2 to 3 million people.
A massive horde.
I've read modern logistical analyses of this, moving 3 million people through a barren desert, providing water, sanitation, and food. It defies all modern logistical comprehension. How does scholarship actually handle this?
It is fiercely debated. The source outlines three main approaches scholars take. First, there is the traditional literal view.
Which is?
This view accepts the massive numbers at face value and argues that the entire 40-year journey was sustained purely by constant, miraculous, divine intervention.
So the sheer impossibility of it is exactly the point.
God sustained the impossible.
Okay, what's the second option?
The second approach looks at the linguistics, specifically the Hebrew word elef.
Elef.
Yes. In later Hebrew, elef translates simply as thousand. But in older ancient Hebrew contexts, elef can refer to a clan, a family unit, or a specific military squad, regardless of its exact numerical size.
Wait, really?
Yes. So when the text says Judah had 74 elef, it might not mean 74,000 men. It might mean 74 military squads.
Which would drastically change the total.
It would reduce the total population to a much more historically and logistically manageable number, maybe around 20,000 to 30,000 people.
That makes a lot more sense logistically, though it obviously changes how you read the plain text in English. And the third option?
The third is textual corruption. The idea that over centuries of hand copying, the numbers were accidentally inflated or perhaps intentionally exaggerated by later editors to emphasize the glory and scale of the nation.
So where does the source suggest we land?
The survey's recommended conclusion on the math is simply interpretive modesty. The numbers remain a mystery, but the theological point that God meticulously organized and preserved a massive people group stands regardless of how you translate elef.
All right, the math is one thing. I can live with some mystery there. But I want to push hard on the second issue.
Chapter 31.
Chapter 31, the war against Midian. Because to a modern listener, this doesn't read like ancient history. It reads like a war crime.
It is intensely difficult to read.
Israel is commanded to execute a devastating campaign of holy war against the Midianites. They burn the towns, they take the plunder, and Moses actually gets angry that the army spared the Midianite women. He orders the execution of everyone except the young virgin girls.
Yes.
How do we sit here and extract spiritual value from a text that features Bronze Age slaughter?
It is arguably the most difficult passage in the book, and to navigate it without either, dismissing the text entirely or endorsing horrific violence, we have to rely heavily on how historical theology contextualizes it.
Okay. Walk me through the context.
The source emphasizes two crucial frameworks: ancient Near Eastern context and the specific localized nature of divine judgment. First, we have to look back at chapter 25.
The Battle of Peor incident.
Exactly. The Midianites were not random bystanders. They were the architects, alongside Moab, of the Peor apostasy. They intentionally weaponized syncretism, the blending of sexual temple rituals and idolatry, to culturally and spiritually annihilate Israel from the inside out.
Because Balaam's vocal curse failed.
Right. So they used cultural seduction.
So it wasn't a war for territory. It was a response to an existential threat.
Within the theology of the text, chapter 31 is framed strictly as an execution of divine retributive justice against a corrupting force that nearly destroyed the covenant community.
Still, it's brutal.
It is brutal, but here is the vital distinction the scholarship makes. This war is portrayed as a unique, unrepeatable, localized event commanded by God as judge. It is not presented as a general policy of foreign relations.
Nor is it a standing order for conquest anywhere else.
Exactly. So anyone trying to pull Chapter 31 out of its ancient context to justify modern political violence or religious warfare is fundamentally abusing the text.
That is a crucial point for listeners to hear. Theologians don't view this as a template.
Absolutely not. Theologians do not view this passage as a template for modern ethical behavior. We read it through the lens of ancient redemptive history, recognizing that the brutal realities of the Bronze Age were the severe arena in which God preserved the lineage that would eventually bring about ultimate redemption.
So the enduring value of the Book of Numbers does not lie in replicating its ancient warfare.
No, its value lies in its wilderness theology.
Wilderness theology. And what does that mean for the listener today? If we aren't migrating through a literal desert, how does this ancient manuscript actually diagnose our modern lives?
Well, the source argues that when you strip away the ancient setting, the tents, the sandals, the bronze weapons, the underlying psychological and spiritual behaviors are staggeringly modern.
Human nature doesn't change much.
It really doesn't. The Book of Numbers holds up a mirror to human nature. Think about the constant grumbling for different food. The text calls it a craving, but it's really a masterclass in consumer complaint.
Consumer complaint, wow.
How often does our modern entitlement blind us to the daily, miraculous provisions we actually possess? We romanticize a toxic past because we are temporarily uncomfortable in the present.
Ouch. That hits close to home. Or what about the leadership crises? Korah's rebellion or Moses striking the rock.
Yes.
It's a devastating critique of leadership narcissism. The text insists that authority must be mediated, accountable, and entirely submitted to God. The moment a leader makes the mission about their own ego, their own power, or their own frustration, they fracture the community.
And we cannot forget the spies. The tragedy of chapters 13 and 14 is a profound warning against fear-driven decision-making. The Israelites let the visible threat, the giants in the land, completely overrule their trust in the invisible realities of God's track record.
I think about that in my own life a lot.
Yeah.
How often do I map out my limitations based entirely on my fears, completely ignoring the resources and past deliverances I actually have? I let the giants dictate my reality.
Finally, the text is a relentless warning against moral minimalism.
Moral minimalism.
The idea that once you are redeemed, once you are liberated from Egypt, your ethical behavior no longer matters. Numbers insists that proximity to the divine demands transformation.
You can't just hang out by the reactor.
Exactly. You cannot live around the reactor without adopting the protocols of holiness.
So pulling all of this together, we started today by opening a book with the worst, most boring title imaginable.
Numbers.
A book that looks like a static spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But what we actually found is a wildly dynamic, chaotic, and brutally honest journey.
It is anything but boring.
We explored the architecture of holiness, the tragic consequences of selective amnesia, mutinies, talking donkeys, brilliant female lawyers changing the Constitution, and the heavy, uncomfortable realities of ancient judgment.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. But the through line, the ultimate takeaway of this massive survey, is that human failure does not exhaust divine faithfulness. God's promises stand, even when the people meant to inherit them completely fall apart.
The wilderness is not an accident, and it is not a mistake. It is a necessary geography of the soul.
The geography of the soul.
It is the place that strips away our illusions, tests our allegiances, and exposes exactly what is in our hearts before we reach our destination.
It is the crucible we all have to walk through. To listening, thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the desert. We hope we've proved that looking past the label can lead you to uncover some of the most profound psychological and spiritual insights of the ancient world.
It has been a truly illuminating exploration.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Oh, I'm curious.
It's a detail we didn't spend much time on, but it is buried right near the end of the text, in Numbers chapter 33. This chapter is just a massive repetitive itinerary.
Very repetitive.
It's literally just a long list saying, they left this place and they camped at this place, over and over and over again. From a narrative perspective, it's exhausting to read, Why painstakingly write all those stops down?
What does the source suggest?
Our source document suggests a brilliant reason. Because memory is a spiritual discipline.
Wow.
Moses wrote down the entire journey, every bitter water well, every camp where they rebelled, every place where God provided, so that the new generation wouldn't forget the lessons that cost their parents their lives.
To prevent amnesia.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with this question. What if the only way to prevent the next generation from repeating your mistakes is to painstakingly, honestly document your own wilderness journey? If you had to write down the stops where you failed and the stops where you're rescued, what did your itinerary look like?